Gavin trained at Plumpton, and when he graduated, he was offered two jobs, Argentina or Château-la-Sauvageon, in what was to become the area of the Terrasses du Larzac. So he worked for Sauvageon, creating its reputation for 8 years until it was sold to Gérard Bertrand. And then in 2009, Gavin started making his own wine, and that's what he's been doing for the last 11 years with delicious Saint-Saul-based La Traversée. So Gavin, over to you to tell us all about the Languedoc's really rising star of an area.
Larzac, yes, we are the young, I'm going to have to put my glasses on because I can't see a thing. We are the youngest appellation of France, which all happened we became an appellation in 2014 after a good 20 years of work to get there through various people, including Jean-Pierre Venture, Vincent Gourmand, various presidents, and now we have Seb Hion. Now, we are situated, I really don't know how much any of you know, we are situated northwest of Montpellier, about 45 minutes northwest. It's a big area. We're about 32 communes, 650 hectares. And it's in a kind of a V shape that spreads out from Montpellier to Lodève. And we're basically underneath a ridge of limestone, which is called the Larzac. That's why we're called Terrasses du Larzac. The difference being we are the most northern appellation of the Languedoc. Therefore, one of the highest, between 50, 300 meters, 350, probably even 400, even just outside my window there, vineyards. So we have, what else can I tell you about the Terrasses du Larzac? We produce, just the basics, we produce around 19,000 hectolitres, which has grown dramatically. When I started 20 years ago, we were, I think, about 25 wineries, and now we're over 100 with 3 co-ops. So things have dramatically changed over the years. When it comes to soils and diversity of geology, it's the thing that really hit me the most with this region. I came here, I was working at actually Domaine de Pujol. I started many years ago, in 96, I think. And I worked 3 years there. And then I was contacted by investors in various areas to find a terroir, a unique terroir, like everybody wants to find a unique terroir. And we looked for about 18 months all over the place. And somebody said to me, have you ever been to Saint-Jean-de-Vlaquière? I said, no, I've never been. And I went there and it was just, wow, this place is unlike anywhere I've ever seen. And geology-wise, it's the most diverse geology, in fact, in France, just about. We have, I'll give you a map. I don't know if that really works, does it? Does the map work? No, you can't really see him. Where? But we're on a limestone ridge, as I was saying, but underneath that limestone ridge, we have old volcanoes, we have schist, we have grès, we have chalky soils, very white chalky soils. So it's incredibly diverse, which produces various different styles of wine, although the uniqueness with our appellation is the freshness, is the drinkability, I would say, if that's a word in English, I guess it is. As opposed to the rest of the Languedoc. which is generally lower down, doesn't have so much influence from the mountains, because we are directly, and if I could just, which I can't, I literally have when I look out my window, I have the Larzac right in front of me. It's just a few hundred meters away, which is quite beautiful, but I can't really show you. Can I? Can anyone see that? Can they see that? So, oh no, it's not going to work, is it? I have no idea if that's just blinding everyone, or if anyone could have seen anything.
We can see it. Yes, we can. Yeah. Gavin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a minute, because I'm going to lose connection here. Okay, let's get to varieties. We basically have the 4-5 classics: Syrah, Grenache, Carignan, Mourvèdre. They are the basic varieties of the appellation. We have to use around 75% into the blend. However, Sanso and various others are permitted as well, but in smaller quantities. Sanso can go up to 25%, I believe, in the blend. I'm a very big fan of that variety personally. It's one that I use quite a lot. What else do I want to say? The change, well, basically the change in the appellation over the last 20 years, as I was saying, and since we've had the appellation, there's been a lot of interest in the region, and there's winemakers, investors, etc., coming from all over the place. So it's a very dynamic area with people from all walks of life coming in, and that has actually permitted or accentuated the organic status of our region, because we're now, I think there's 70%, 75% of all our producers are organic, and that's something that we want to push, obviously, for obvious reasons. Let me think. What else do I want to talk about? The future. And the future is, we are in the middle of lockdown, so the future is not looking that great. But of the appellation, we're going to try and keep up our communications. We do, every year we do, how do I say that? Tout en terrasse. We do manifestations with restaurants, carvistes throughout all of France. And we go to a different area like Lyon, Toulouse, and with the majority of the vignerons who come along. We do a circulade every year, which Rosemary comes to just about every year, in various destinations throughout the whole of the Terrasses du Larzac. It's a beautiful area. I do suggest coming down if you can. It really is a stunning place. I'm trying to think of what else I can talk about without hearing questions, because questions would be easier. What else can I talk about with the Terrasses du Larzac? Good.
I'm just wondering if anybody else obviously has any questions for Gavin, then to please post them.
It would probably be easier, because I can go on about talking to Terrasses du Larzac, but I'm not sure how much anyone knows about the Terrasses du Larzac, or whether anyone has tasted Terrasses du Larzac.
So what about land values? How, with all the newcomers in, what has that done?
Well, the land has gone up in price. It's doubled since I've been around, but there are certain areas where it's getting even more expensive, like up near the Peguerol d'Escalette, etc., because there's very limited land. And land prices have gone up. They haven't gone up as much as Pic Saint Loup.
So what are the comparative values?
Comparative values?
So what, if you were buying a hectare of good land in Terrasses du Larzac as opposed to Pic Saint Loup, what would you be paying?
Ooh. Well, we are technically around 25 to 30. There is even 35,000 euros a hectare. It used to be around 10 to 12. Whereas Pic Saint Loup, you can go up to 100,000 in certain areas, which is crazy because they don't even have their own appellation, I don't believe. Oh, they just got it.
Yes, they've just got it, haven't they?
Oh, well.
Out their political problems.
Well, we had it before them. And we don't have such a mono terroir. They do have a very much of a mono terroir. It's basically calcaire, limestone.
We have a question here from Carolyn Bosworth Davis. It says, it's called Terrasse. Are the vineyards on a series of slopes? I'll also get Carolyn to unmute.
Well, we call it Terrasses du Larzac because the main thing is this ridge, is the Larzac, which is basically limestone cliffs all around. And then there are the majority of the vineyards, yes, are on. My vineyards are on tiered terraces, and a great deal are, yes, the majority, I would say.
Do they all have to be picked by hand?
Generally, I would say a good 90% is picked by hand. Probably nearly everything. I mean, I pick everything by hand. I would have thought the majority of people do, yes. With co-ops, it's a bit more difficult. But there are only 3 co-ops.
Is there anything further, Carolyn, or is that?
No, that's fine. No, it just implied that there are a series of terraces. So I was thinking, is it terraces like you see in the Douro, or is it just one significant terrace? Or
I mean, the area is, it's 45 kilometers long and about 20 kilometers wide. So it's a big area. And everything on the round where I am, where I was just showed you outside there, the only vineyards up there are on terraces. But not all Terrasses du Larzac is on that type of. There are some around Aniam where it's a lot flatter. But the majority, yes, are in altitude, and they are old terraces, and you have to build up your walls, etc., because they fall down because of erosion, etc., which we've been having a lot of. We get a lot of influence from the Cevennes, and more so what with climate change. So we're having to rebuild our walls quite often, so they do fall down.
A lot of rebuilding.
Yeah. It's becoming climate change is having a massive impact on the area. That's for sure. From erosion generally.
Okay, one of our members, Meg Houston-Maker, who's based on the east coast of the America, she has a question for you. I'm not sure. Are you unmuted, Meg?
Sure. Hello. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I understand that it's a red only appellation.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So are people producing rosé and labeling it as Languedoc, or is there really not much rosé production?
No. There's a fair bit of rosé being produced. There's a fair bit of white being produced as well. Within the same vineyards and the terrace, but we don't as yet. That might be a project for the future. Well, it is a project for the future because there are great rosés made from Sanso in the area. Fantastic rosés. I make 100% Sanso as well. Personally, I make one, but obviously I can't call it Terrasses du Larzac. There are great white wines being made, but we don't have a consistency at the moment to introduce the 2 wines into the Terrasses du Larzac at the minute. But it is a project in the future.
That will happen.
I think so.
I hope so.
Yeah, it will be a long time, if we're still around.
That's cheerful.
Is that okay, Meg? Okay, and Liz Saggis has a question for you.
Thank you, Gavin. I'd like to know a bit more about the age of the vines and which varieties are being planted most when people are coming in and planting new vineyards. And
The age of the vines, I would say that there's a great deal of vines around 30 to 40 years old. But there are also a lot older parcels. There's some very old parcels. Just in our village, there's some very old parcels up to 100, 110 years old. I would say the average is probably 30 to 40. There are a lot of new plantings. People are actually replanting things like Sanso, Carignan, which is great because they're very well adapted. People are planting less and less Syrah because it's not so well adapted anymore. Mourvèdre has been planted. Yeah, I would say, and Grenache to an extent as well. But thankfully, yes, there's a lot of resurgence with Carignan and Sanso.
What about white Carignan or even Carignan Gris?
Well, white Carignan is a great variety. I fermented the first thing I ever made actually was a white Carignan at Domaine de Pujol. And it's a fantastic variety, and a lot of it was ripped up. But again, more and more people are planting white Carignan, which has a slight Burgundian feel to it, along with Terret as well. Terret Blanc. Terret Noir is allowed as well in the Terrasses du Larzac, up to about 5% maximum, I think.
And is there any interest in Macabeo? I'm certainly thinking Roussillon here, but is there any influence?
Mainly Roussillon.
Yes.
And there is a lot in Roussillon.
Yeah.
There is more and more, and there's more and more plantings, which is great because it's very well adapted.
Yes, but it's not suitable for Terrasses du Larzac, or not just.
I don't think so, and I don't think it will become popular. As I say, the Carignan Blanc is really does do the trick here, along with Terret. Grenache Blanc. There's less Grenache Gris. The Grenache Gris is mainly in Roussillon as well.
with the Carignan for the red wines, are the younger vines okay, or because one always hears of old Carignan vines producing wonderful
Yeah, I mean,
wine.
it takes a while. It definitely takes a while to get the complexity you want in Carignan. But when it's young, it gives lovely, very fresh fruit, especially if you pick it slightly early. I have a wonderful Carignan that was grafted and grown and ploughed by horse by a friend who's still around in his 80s, which is quite remarkable. In fact, he caught COVID. He's one of the only people I know, but he's fine.
Phew.
Paul Galibert, he's quite a character in our village and an amazing viticulturist. I have both his parcels, thankfully, that he grafted himself. And it's a very lovely, very old Carignan.
Mm-hmm. Does that answer all your questions, Liz?
Well, I was also wondering about the size of the vineyards and the role of the co-ops. Are they used just by small growers? Are they small co-ops? Are they well regarded?
No, there's medium-sized co-ops. We have Saint Saturnin, Saint Felix, who have now combined, Montpellier. And the size of the vineyards, yeah, I mean, there are people who have 2 hectares and will sell to the co-op. Not many. The majority have probably 10 or 15 hectares, and which they might not be in Terrasses du Larzac. It probably mainly go to Coteaux de Languedoc, but I mean, me, for instance, I've got, what, 5 hectares, which I work completely alone, and pretty much by hand. But it's not, as I say, we've got 650 hectares, so it's not a massive terroir. And there's all sorts of different sizes. I think probably one of the biggest domains would probably be, what, 60 to 80 hectares would be probably the maximum.
Who's that?
That would be Mr. Bertrand.
I thought so.
Of course.
Who else?
Who else, exactly. But generally it would be between 5 and 15 maximum, I would say.
And with a huge growth of number of growers, do you think how much more potential is there for more? I mean, how many more do you think will come on the scene?
Well, I don't think there's going to be much land left.
No.
So I doubt we'll get a lot more. I mean, there's still people, I often have people contact me wanting advice, wanting to know whether they should, wanting to buy because it's kind of the up and coming region. But it's difficult. There isn't much land, and there isn't much area for wineries either. There aren't. I was fortunate. I've got a big old house which I've put the winery in, but it's difficult to find at the minute. Land is becoming rarer and rarer, that's for sure.
So is there more potential for existing growers to buy more land rather than new producers coming
in? Well, even existing growers, a lot of people are looking for land, but they can't. It's not that easy. There isn't a great deal available. Not like in Corbière, you can probably buy, a fair amount of land still. Fougères maybe. Terrasses is becoming harder and harder to find land.
Okay. We have a question from Richard Lane, who's here with us. Richard, are you unmuted? Go ahead and ask.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Gavin. This is interesting. I had a couple of questions, really. One was just on the point you made, which relates obviously to the warmer, increasingly warm climate and the lack of adaptability, say, to take a variety like Syrah, because Syrah is often one of the major varieties in many of the appellations. Do you think, I mean, are the appellation committees aware of this? Are they going to be rewriting their rules to take account of the different growing conditions?
Eventually it will have to be, it will have to be brought up, because it is becoming harder and harder. And there are problems with mortality and disease and etc.
I mean, do you see? I mean, Grenache would obviously be better suited to increasingly warm and drought-like conditions.
Well, the problem with Grenache is the alcohol levels.
Yeah.
So that is becoming difficult as well. I mean, basically, for anybody in agriculture at the minute, things are becoming more and more difficult year by year. But it seems that the varieties adapt. I mean, last year, 2019, was probably the hottest year on record in our area. And I made some of the finest wines I've ever made. I don't quite know how. I'm quite mystified by the whole thing. But I don't actually do an in-analysis. I do everything to taste. So I pick quite early. I pick very early, in fact, compared to most people. This year I finished the 26th of August, totally finished.
Wow.
Whereas I know people who are harvesting until late September. I didn't quite understand why, but I think we have to adapt, definitely adapt. And it seems like the varieties, it seems like we're still making really great wines, which is encouraging.
And thank you.
Because when we were looking at it, we're not that encouraged.
Thank you. And I wonder if I could just ask a second question that sort of relates to what you just said, and that is about the awareness of Languedoc appellations like Terrasses du Larzac, obviously, which is a very young appellation, because Languedoc is such an interesting area. And I feel that once people get to know the Languedoc, they know it, but I still think that people outside the Languedoc don't understand it very well. And I just wondered whether there's a problem there, whether you've got Terrasses du Larzac or La Lavinière in Minervois and others who are producing great wine, but perhaps the awareness of their appellations and their branding, if you like, isn't very well known outside the Languedoc. Is that a problem, particularly as Languedoc historically has bad rep?
Yeah, I mean, it is the biggest vineyard in the world, so it is a big area, and it is a little bit confusing, it must be said to people. But since we got the appellation, in France, we've been very fortunate. We've been, voted appellation of the year a few years in a row by Revue de Vin de France. Basically, most restaurants now in France, especially Paris, etc., have a Terrasses du Larzac on the list. It is becoming, in France anyway,
that's great.
Really quite a popular region. Probably as much as Pic-Saint-Loup, possibly not, but we're getting more and more interest, it must be said, especially in France. I don't know how it is, obviously, in England. I have no idea.
You can get a little bit, but not much.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
It's probably Bertrand again.
Yeah, he does crop up now and again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Richard. Now moving to South Africa, Angela Lloyd has a question for you on vine trellising. Go ahead, Angela.
Hi, Gavin. You say there are a lot of old vines there as well. Are those grown as bush vines on Goblet, or are they all trellised?
There is still a lot of Goblet left. Carignan nearly always in Goblet, because it grows upwards as opposed to Syrah, which kind of grows outwards. So Syrah always on trellis, just about always. You can do a Goblet étalé, they call it, which I have, which is a very low Goblet vine, and then you grow the, I can't speak English, the shoots into the trellis, and have very high trellis. But Sanso as well, there's quite a lot of old Sanso that is bushed, but it does tend to grow outwards as well. And so some people have converted from Goblet to trellis. In fact, that was done a lot in the 80s in the region.
We have a lot of, we have a lot of Sanso.
Yeah.
Goblet and bush vines. Yeah.
Yeah. In South Africa, yeah.
Sorry, Andrew, if I can ask another question. You talk of Carignan Blanc. Is it an actual variety or a mutation?
No, it's the white variety of the red. It's the same.
Okay.
I believe it's the same. C'est une mutation complètement. Right. But I mean, I have white in my Carignan red. I have white. I have a good 5% white, and they actually work incredibly well together. And so I vinify them always together. But yeah, it probably was a mutation at the beginning, but it's from the same family. I mean, it's the same.
Yes.
It's the same
source. Like our Semillon, white and gris.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And they work very well together, I think.
No, very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Rosemary, I think there's your time.
I just wondered how your winemaking has changed over the last, say, 20 years, and also what you're doing about higher alcohol levels.
Oh, massively changed.
Yeah. So what were you doing?
Before I used to do all sorts of stuff, but I used to experiment a lot with all sorts of things. I mean, at the beginning, I experimented with all sorts of different yeasts, etc. I mean, temperatures, techniques, fermentation barrel, all kinds of stuff. Early, late, just loads of experimentation. Now, I listen to a lot of music, play music, bit of ping pong, it's best to do very little, I think,
Mm.
at the end of the day. Do a great deal in the vines, great deal of work in the vines. And then actual winemaking, I personally, I don't even pump anymore. I don't do any remontage at all.
Well, so you just
it's more of an infusion. I do more of an infusion. And I pick, as I say, totally to taste. I've given up with, probably 15 years that I've given up with analysis, during fermentation and before fermentation. After, for the bottling, we have to do it anyway to get our certificate, as it were. But yeah, I've changed things massively since in the last 20 years. But I don't have an monologue. I am a monologue, but I don't have one, so I don't actually have to listen to anyone.
You don't need one if you're an monologue.
No, well, maybe, but I don't use any of the chemistry anymore. That's finished. That finished quite a long time ago.
Would you describe yourself as a natural winemaker?
I don't like that.
No.
Everyone in Paris tries to make me call myself a natural winemaker. I don't even put organic on my label, and I am organic and I pay for it. I think it's just totally normal to work like that. I don't understand why I'd put any marketing into it. I do understand why people do. Of course, it is important. But I personally don't adhere to that kind of marketing.
You're your own man.
Yes, very much. Hence why I work alone.
So what do you do in the vineyard? What do you do in the vineyard that you didn't do? And you say you're doing a lot of more work in the vineyard.
In the vineyard, I still, hoe and pioche and do things like that. But I actually cut more the grass more and the herbs. What do we call them? Weeds, even. To keep the structure of the soil, doing things with the phases of the moon and with atmospheric pressure. It's all actually quite basic stuff, but it's very hands-on. And as I say, with climate change, we're having a lot of people still plow all the time, but the soil structure is just falling apart. So there is a bit of a revolution going on. There are people, doing cover crops, plowing in the cover crops or cutting the cover crops. There's all sorts of techniques going on at the minute. Biodynamic principles as well. Although I do less and less of that now. I used to do a lot of it. I do less and less because I find with climate change, things are already accelerating. The aromas and the tannins, etc., are accelerating on the grapes. And I find with the biodynamic principles, we can accentuate that even more. So I do less and less. In fact, a lot less and less, but very hands-on in the vineyard. You have to be. It's timing, I think, in the vineyard. It's very much timing.
Observation.
Yeah, observation, exactly. That's very important, and patience. Which is something.
Wineries that do biodynamics practices in the appellation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
more and more. Yeah.
But something that you're veering away from, you feel, because of the climate.
Yes, personally, yes. Because we're not really like Burgundy, which is where a lot of the biodynamic. And they're changing. They've had the earliest year that they've ever had. I've got friends that were harvesting in mid-August. It's never been done, ever.
Wow. So what date did you actually start picking this year? You said you'd finish by.
Well, I just called, because as I say, I taste the grapes, a good 2-3 times a day. And then once it gives me an emotion, once it literally gives me an emotion or makes me feel something, I go and I can do that. And I managed to do it in 2-3 days, just with friends, and my children drove down and we got it done. in 2-3 days. Yeah. So I think I started the 24th and no, 25th and finished the no, I can't remember.
Yeah.
23rd and finished the 26th. Something like that.
Right.
Liz has got another question. Liz, you're unmuted. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, please. Gavin, could you tell us a little more about your own specific wines, and also where they're available? Do they all stay in France, or can we get them over here?
I sell mainly in France, and although I didn't expect to at the beginning, I expected to sell mainly in export markets because that's all I knew before. But bizarrely, everything just worked in France very, very, very quickly. My idea was to make one wine, Terrasses du Larzac, from Syrah, Grenache, Carignan, Sanso, from the 4 different soil varieties of the Terrasses du Larzac, which is grès, slightly volcanic, schist, and chalk, which we're fortunate enough in Saint-Jean-de-Blaquière to have. Between Saint-Jean-de-Blaquière and Saint-Privat, it's very diverse. And so I make one wine called La Traversée, which is in Terrasses du Larzac. But I also, from time to time, make a 100% Sanso, which doesn't have a name, doesn't have anything on the label, to be honest. I'm slightly anti-marketing me. Which I have to produce in Vin de France. But yes, it mainly sells in France. I'm not on the UK market. From time to time with Virgin, because my business partner, in fact, the guy who said, look, you can go ahead and do it if you want, because I didn't have any money. It was my best friend, who was called Andrew Baker, who is the buyer for Virgin Wines, which is nothing to do with, he has nothing to do with the winemaking, etc. But from time to time, they take a few bottles.
And are you in the winery, you say you do the minimum, all in steel, concrete?
I only work in concrete or wood, yeah. I have the first eggs ever produced, the first 16 hectoliter eggs. I had the first 3. I always wanted to make a wine that used fluid dynamics. My father was a scientist in fluid dynamics and how concrete works, etc., and finite elements. And yeah, he inspired me to have that style of tank, which I carry on with oval foudre in wood. To have something that is quite unique, which shows very much the freshness and they're pretty much terroir-driven wines, I would say.
Thank you, Gavin. I'm not sure if there's any other further questions. I'm not sure if there's anything else you wish to say, or Rosemary, if you have any other questions.
No more questions. So it just remains to say thank you, Gavin, for a personal insight into a very interesting part of the Languedoc.